everybody see my screen? I'm going to make it a little bit bigger now. And I guess for now, you guys won't see me, which is awesome. I think it's much better to focus on the slide, not on me. But what I'm going to do in the next about 30 minutes, I'm going to go through a China Internet report that I put together a couple months ago and give you some of the research and study that I have done. For the past year, I spent almost 80–90% of my time in China and just been learning a lot. I think that there's just so much, regardless of where you're from in the world, from learning from China Internet. So I'm going to sort of put things into perspective. And obviously, I'm sure that you guys will have tons of questions at the end, which I'm very, very happy to answer as much as I can. But what I'm going to do for the next 30 minutes is mainly around some of the important statistics that is related to China and some of the major internet and investment trends that I think everybody should pay attention to. All right, to start, my name is Edith Yeung. I am a partner for 500 China Arm. So 500 China actually have done about 35 investment in Greater China area so far. Myself, I actually started as an engineer. I'm born and raised in Hong Kong. I have family in Beijing, Guangzhou, and Hong Kong. But I also spent last 20 years sort of back and forth between China and US. Started as an engineer, spent 10 years mostly enterprise software, Siebel, Oracle, Autodesk. After 10 years enterprise software, I think life is so boring doing enterprise, and sort of went to the consumer side. Right before I joined 500, I was working on Dolphin Browser, which is a Beijing, Wuhan, and San Francisco company, pretty much all engineering and the product team in China. And we grew mostly outside the US user base from 0 to 150 million installed worldwide. And then sold it to a Chinese gaming company, Changyou, about 3 years ago. And after that, I joined 500 startups, done about 45 investments so far. And this past year, I've been a lot more active, particularly looking at Greater China area in terms of investments. All right, so what I'm going to do is to put things into perspective, and to hopefully, you may not need to be convinced, but I want to show you some statistics of why you should care about China market. There are just so many Chinese people, and China is the largest market in the world. Compared to the US, in terms of population, there's almost 1.4 billion people in China, almost 4.5x of the US population. And in terms of internet users, it's 751 million, and that's definitely 2x of the US population. Having said that, the internet penetration, there's still room to grow, about 54% right now, and definitely growing. So compared to the US, if you look at in terms of populations and internet penetration, there's still a lot more room to grow for the Chinese market. But the GDP per capita is much lower compared to the US. It's about 8,000 USD GDP per capita versus almost 60,000 US for US population. So definitely a lot of really interesting, very exciting in terms of as a market, because there's just so much more that will to come. If you look at a little bit more detail, as I mentioned earlier, China internet market is the largest in the world. And what's interesting is that 95% of the internet population actually access the internet via mobile phones. 71% of the population own a smartphone. And what's even more interesting, if you look at this, this particular slide, I want everybody to pay attention to 889 million WeChat users. This is crazy, which means that not only smartphone user, even on the feature phone, even dumb phone user are using WeChat. So it's pretty much, it's not just a Chinese internet market, it's almost like a WeChat internet market, because a lot of folks are accessing, not even through a browser, is actually finding the information off of WeChat. And out of the 751 million users, 500 million of them are using mobile payment. I think China is truly a cashless society. I remember a couple months ago when 500 Startup launched our Hangzhou office, some of our colleagues was trying to pay for a meal and with cash. The cashier, which is probably in her early 20s, look at us really dumbfounded because they didn't know how to process cash. No one actually used cash anymore, at least for the last year since she joined as a cashier. And it's just really daunting to me that, it's so not the case in the US. And in many ways, China and I think India very soon will sort of leapfrog what we have seen here in terms of particular mobile payment. And on top of that, amount is 751 million internet population. Not many of them are highly educated. And in fact, many of them are below average income. So as I mentioned earlier, the GDP per capita is about 8,000 versus 57,000 in the US. And it seems like lately there's a lot of conversation in terms of the growth had dropped a little bit, down to 6.3% by 2019. It's still growing, but it's not as crazy compared to the last 10 or 15 years. That's why I think, recently, it's not the only reason, but, China has been pushing the One Belt, One Road, and putting, I think they pledged over almost in $1 trillion in supporting the One Belt, One Road, and supported the whole Silk Road, Southeast Asia, Africa, and India as well in terms of investment. So I'm excited to see how that turn out. Next things, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the 72% of the internet users are really, really young. You're talking about between 10 to 39-year-old. They don't make a lot, but they're super young. And a quarter of them are students, another 20% are entrepreneurs, which means that the young people from day one, they may or may not even think about need to build a website. In fact, they're thinking about mobile internet from day one because that's what they grew up with, which is a really, really exciting marketplace. And you will see, I believe, a lot more invention that will come out from, and it will be, and I think, 10 or 15 years ago, there's a lot of talk of how, Chinese entrepreneur will copy from the US. I absolutely believe now it's the other way around. In fact, I have a lot of conversation with folks sort of with the US internet giants like Facebook, Apple, Google. Those guys are very curious about what's going on with Baidu, Alibaba on Tencent. Move on to the next slide. We know the populations, we understand the demographic. If you are thinking about coming to visit China, where should you go? So Beijing is similar to the San Francisco Bay Area, is the #1 startup cities with the most internet unicorn. The study I've done here, I actually, when I have a lot of free time and nothing to do at home, I do really enjoy doing research. So I actually did this manually. I went on CB Insight. There's many other sources that I really like, and basically look at all the unicorns that we have out there, and basically count by the actual headquarters. So this is how we come up with this particular studies. Beijing is definitely by far #1. Obviously, a lot of folks talk about Shenzhen as the hardware capital of the world. There's absolutely many, many amazing hardware like DJI, BYD, and many handset manufacturers are there. But I think in terms of internet software focus, is still Beijing is the #1 spot, followed by Hangzhou, which is the home of Alibaba. Shanghai, continue to do strong, but I do found a lot of the B2C focus startup is still of Beijing, and Wuhan, Guangzhou, Chengdu is all growing. The way that I look at Beijing is actually quite similar to Silicon Valley, and the reason for that really is, if you think about it, is where the internet giants headquarters are, which means that some of these, so the ex-Baidu, ex-Google, yes, there are still some Google folks in Beijing, or ex-Microsoft folks, when they leave, they like to start companies sort of around them, their old mothership. And then Tsinghua Beida, similar to the Stanford and Berkeley. So very, very similar to that ecosystem. I think I found that in Beijing. Next slide is, we talked about hotspot, we understand the demographic, we also need to understand that, like in terms of funding. I am sort of missing a slide here, but I do wanted to say that the Chinese government is the biggest venture capital firm, and actually, in fact, fund of fund in the world, $231 billion. In terms of I think it's over 200 funds that's backed by the Chinese government, and the aggregate total funds backed by Chinese government is about 231 billion. And China now after the US have the highest number in terms of private companies that value over $1 billion. So this really, really exciting place. I found a lot more and more entrepreneurs in China, not compared to before, I really focus on China market only because China market is actually big enough for them to go IPO without ever even step foot outside China. So in fact, companies like the BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, these are just a random tidbit. I don't, for some reason, like the Alibaba and Tencent, their founder CEO are both with the last name Ma. Not sure why that's the case, but that's what's going on now. And then there's a new generation of internet companies too, not only the BAT. I like to sort of make fun of this because if you're Chinese, TMD may means Tamada, not a very good word, but these three words mean Toutiao, which is a new, very, very popular news app recently just acquired Musical.ly for almost $1 billion. Meituan is sort of like a Groupon of China, and Didi, which is the Uber of China. These three new giants have raised billions and billions of dollars and doing amazingly well. And to me, also form a new generation of internet Chinese platforms. So very exciting to see that there are a new generation coming up in China as well. So what I'm going to do next, after now we sort of set the baseline, is to go through some of the most popular trends that's happening in China. And on top of that, this is the sort of the last slide before I go into trends. This particular slide, I actually went through sort of, we know really well in the foreign, like who's the PayPal, who's the eBay, who's the YouTube. But this is basically the comparison how, you know, all of these play in the US, you will find an equivalent in China. And one of the things I also want to point out particularly is how WeChat are representing many, many, many things that we'll see in the US is definitely super unique compared to what you see in the rest of the world. So since I talked about WeChat, I'm going to actually start with trend number 1, which is messaging in China. WeChat is the #1 most frequently used app in China. It's used by almost 80% of the internet population in China, with 889 million monthly active users. Similar to Facebook, they have their own version of Facebook business page. Now they have a 10 million official account. A lot of brands use Facebook for customer service, hence the big number. And they also have their own developer platform. So right now, at least 200,000 WeChat developers and growing. And average, 194 is the average number of WeChat contact per users. Really, really, really sticky app developed by Tencent. And many of them are sending payment. And so a few years ago, for some of them, may or may not know, WeChat actually launched sort of their own WeChat Pay. And the way that they did it was super creative. It happened a few years ago during Chinese New Year. And there's a habit for more senior or your parents sort of give the younger people red envelope with money during Chinese New Year. They did a virtual envelope for folks to basically attach their bank account and be able to send these virtual monies to younger people, and became a huge phenomenon. And now, even today, if I want to sort of like send red envelope to a group of my friends, they do this really, really creative ways for people to sort of fight for whoever to get there first, get the larger chunk of the money that you send out. It's not only purely for peer-to-peer payment use case. Sending red envelope money become a social habit and is very, very unique and definitely China only. And so I look at WeChat as basically a Facebook plus WhatsApp plus Tinder. Yes, people do date and find stranger and date on Facebook, PayPal and Slack combined. I think many businesses, including some of my friends at Baidu and Alibaba, use WeChat for most of the business conversation. I found it's very difficult to try to find anybody on email when you do business in China, but I can 100% guarantee you will find whoever you want to find on WeChat for sure. All right, we talked a little bit about mobile payment before. And now I'm going to jump into the statistics around mobile payment. So even though WeChat have their own mobile payment, Alibaba, Alipay been around much longer, since 2004. And it was born because of support of Taobao. So Taobao is basically the eBay of China. And compared to the US market, the Chinese mobile payment market is 50 times bigger. And last year transacted $5.5 trillion mobile payment. And Alibaba have 54% of the market share. And WeChat now is 37% market share compared to about 16% market share a year ago. This is crazy. And I believe, for 2017, it will grow even more. And this is only me talking. Maybe my friends in Alibaba may not like it, but I think Alipay probably, Ant Financial would have gone public if it's not because of WeChat Pay. But still, obviously, Alipay is still a very, very strong player. This is what WeChat Pay is absolutely the biggest threat to Alibaba. And I think that, most of the merchant, if you go to China today, accept both as a payment methods. If you go to any of the retail stores, it's a really, really popular, much more than what you see in Apple Pay or Samsung Pay. It's just cannot even compare. All right, number 3, cryptocurrency in China. Neo, which is being labeled as the Ethereum of China, has been now already have traded over $1 billion and probably $2 billion now. Chinese people absolutely love cryptocurrency, despite the fact that most of the exchanges or ICO platform were asked to temporarily stop operations on September 11th. China did not shut down Bitcoin mining. And I think right now, Korea probably is number 1 in the world. But as soon as China open up all the exchanges again, I'm sure that it's going to climb back to number 1. And so before September 11, it was the largest. Right now, I would say probably number 2 or 3. But I absolutely believe it will come back because Chinese, we have this gambling blood, like in our blood. And I think all the Chinese just love to gamble, and cryptocurrency is really, really hot topic. And I do believe that continue things like Ethereum. I'm very supportive of another project right now called Nebulous or other token like Quantum. These are all really, really good projects come out of China. And because now a lot of these entrepreneurs are not quite sure what's going on in terms of Chinese government policy, many of these great token projects or blockchain projects are forced to go overseas. So, investor like myself and very sort of supportive of like globalization that wanted to bring a lot of these projects outside of China. I've been super excited to get to meet some of these great entrepreneurs. So really wanted to continue to support these guys. So I'm really all for crypto for China. All right, number 4 trends is absolutely shopping. Chinese people like to shop a lot. This is a photo that you find easily in this between the Shenzhen and Hong Kong cross border. At the border, you see they just like to shop a lot and carry all these luggage cross border, and in particular with, it's very strange, but like baby powder, formula, or any sort of luxury goods are just really popular items that Chinese people like to buy. And if you look at some statistics, by 2020, the e-commerce market for China would be 1.7 billion. This is sorry, not billion, trillion. I misspoke. This is definitely insane, and I'm sure that you guys have heard of the November 11 Guangguanjie. Is our shopping day, sort of like the Black Friday of China. Just keep breaking all kind of record every single year. And if you look at just the volume for delivery, 4 million express delivery personnel per day by 2020, and 1 million food takeout delivery staff. It's just insane. And most of the Chinese cities, in fact, a lot of my friends in Beijing, like if you buy something in the morning, they actually expect they will get it in the afternoon. just because how efficient delivering network have built in across China. And because there's so many people, they can actually afford to have warehouses even in certain district within a populated city. So this definitely, you don't see that in the US. Very, very exciting place to do commerce. And but it's not only, there's also new trends happening within the e-commerce space. We like to call KOL, sort of these influencers, internet celebrities. So this is one example of Nianga Mama, the rice cake mama. So this lady was formerly was a nurse herself. After she gave birth, she started blogging and doing video about what sort of baby product or things that she likes to buy for her own son, and become very, very popular with 7 million followers on WeChat. Now she's doing about 1.2 million, this is US dollar, monthly GMV, and built a whole business around herself. This is definitely a big trend, very, very popular and very well understood in terms of e-commerce in China. And then we heard about, or Amazon have announced their concept of Amazon Go, and I guess in 2016, but none of us can really get in. I actually tried to go and visit in Seattle, but it's still in testing phase. But Alibaba have already launched, and in fact, not only in Shanghai, but also in Hangzhou, a true cashless grocery store. Hema Xiansheng, I actually got the chance to visit earlier this year. It's just so fun. They only accept Alipay. The GMV last year is already 37 million. And they do delivery for you. So, and the conveyor belt for the actual delivery, once you're done shopping, you put it in a bag, and it actually shoot up to a conveyor belt in the ceiling. And they will take this bag and then deliver to your home. It's just amazingly convenient. I absolutely suggest everyone to go check out the shop in Shanghai. And then on top of that, you would think some of these older brands like Netease or Xiaomi, they're not necessarily old, but they are also reinventing themselves as well. On the left, Xiaomi no longer just a smartphone manufacturers. They also building their whole ecosystem of smart home appliances and been doing really, really well. And on the right-hand side is Wang Yi Yanxuan. So Wang Yi, which is also a really old, 10, 15 years old internet companies, and have now built a new brand, basically selecting, as you know, like most of the consumer goods in the world is produced in China. And they would say something like, oh, this pair of shoes is by the original creator of Nike. So it may not be the brand name, but the manufacturers is from very, very high quality. So they're sourcing product via sort of the best manufacturers in the world, and been doing really, really well. And with the rise of middle class of a population, some of these family would rather buy, still want good quality, may not be the luxury brand, but very, very open to these sort of new trusted brand, homegrown in China. All right, we talked about shopping, crypto, and now let's jump into bike sharing. This has been a hot topic, and in fact, this is the one trend actually started in China first, and now we started to see in Southeast Asia, and in fact, some of these brand, let's say, companies in the US is actually now copying China. Bike sharing is everywhere in China, and China is the #1 in terms of bike sharing country in the world, with over 106 million bike sharing app users, and the top 5 in terms of fundraise are Mobike, Ofo, Blue Google, although they just shut down. There's some not so good thing happened to them, and like these guys all raised hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of funding, and be growing really, really nicely. And one of the things, so to point out, I absolutely believe one of the reasons why they've been so successful is the Chinese government, looking at the data in the 80s, 63% of the Chinese commuters actually use bike to go to work, compared to, now 3 years ago, only 11% of the commuter use bike. So traffic and air pollution has been really, really bad. And the Chinese traffic authority, the government absolutely wanted to push this ratio back to 18% by 2020. So a lot of these bike sharing companies have huge support by the Chinese government, and I think this will continue to grow. Now the next trend, I think this is trend number 6, is live streaming in China. Live streaming never really have taken off in the US for some reason, and I will tell you why. I think live streaming in China is definitely a very special Chinese phenomenon that I haven't seen in the rest of the world. As I mentioned, there's this whole concept of internet celebrity, and a lot of these Wang Hong, we call them, are making a living. You're talking about literally at least 200-300K US dollar per year salary. They just do live streaming all day long, and build a huge following for the individuals. And we are estimated this year at least 5 billion in terms of the overall market size. Companies like YY, Six Room, More, Kuaishou are some of these combined are generating 11 billion in RMB in live video streaming revenue. And the way that they make money is from selling virtual goods, they have premium features, doing online games and advertising. For those of you who have a chance, you absolutely download at least any one of these apps, and you will see, let's say, for example, I really want to send Newton virtual flowers, and he's performing, and he will usually get at least I would say anywhere from 50 to 70% in terms of rev share of that value of that virtual goods. But it's not just flower or tipping. It's literally a Ferrari or a diamond ring, all kind of super funny virtual goods that all the follower will get to see. So it's one of those things that the reason why these followers want to buy, because they wanted to show off. And a lot of these broadcasters will address and thank some of this tipper like on the spot, so to make them feel really, really good. So this whole live streaming industry is powered by, in Chinese, I call them Zainan, and Zainan means really lonely young men, that they are sort of like the geek at the nerd, and they would rather look at computer games and talk to people and socially awkward. But they love watching all these their own sort of like star on these live streaming platforms, and continue to sort of support and this ecosystem. It's just really, really amazing to see and very unique to China. All right, a few other trends that's not as surprising, I guess, to the rest of you is gaming. So mobile gaming is huge in China. You go to, this is a photo that I took on a subway. Everybody on their mobile phone playing some sort of game. And China actually last year, 2016, the first time become the #1 in the world in terms of revenue, 24.6 billion in revenue generated for mobile gaming. And iOS for Apple, China is actually beat US as the #1 country in terms of revenue generated for iOS. Very, very exciting place. I think a lot of the mobile game developers used to sort of ignore China for a while, but now many of them are seeking a game publisher to work with them to sort of make sure that they get the Chinese version of their game much earlier than before. Games like Honor of Kings, developed by Tencent in 2016, generated 1 billion in revenue, amount to 100 million players. 70 million DAU, you just never heard of that for any other games. And in fact, Chinese government have to pass a law to make sure that kids below, like the teenager, wouldn't play more than 90 minutes per day on this particular game. It's just insane. It actually impacted this Tencent stock price for the day, and but again, and all the kids continue to play. I remember going to some of the airports. Literally, if you get to a certain level within this game, you get a discount for food in offline stores. Just really, really strange. China only phenomenon for you. All right, esports in China. So this is the one thing I actually am the least familiar with. I almost do test every other things, but I am not a huge Dota actually, I don't really play Dota, but I did enough research to understand that China is, again, the largest esports market in the world, 220 million player. Total revenue generated is 7.3 billion US in 2016, and over 11 billion esports video stream delivered in 2016. League of Legends is definitely really, really active. But also Dota actually has been the very, very popular game, esports game in China. So these three guys are the world number 4, 5, and 6 in terms of top highest paying players in the world. But they are also the number 1, 2, 3 in China, and each of them win over 2 million in US dollar for a prize, and it's just amazing. I by chance I was in Seattle, I think in August, where they have a Dota World Championship, and is really either between the Chinese and the Americans are fighting, and it's just really amazing to watch. All right, AI. I only have, I think, 2 more trends. Is AI in China. So China, not only the Chinese companies, is really Chinese government want China to become the number 1 in AI by 2030. Doesn't matter from AlphaGo to like robots for kids, or to sports, to all kind of usage. They just want to invest and support as many AI projects as possible. And I actually did this particular research 2 months ago. I'm already outdated. SenseTime had raised again, I think a couple weeks ago, over 200 million from Alibaba, which is the most funded, I think, AI companies in the world by now. Last year, Chinese have invested 2.6 billion, and I have no doubt this year at least double that. But we believe that AI market will reach 9.1 billion by 2020. So this is the list of most funded Chinese AI companies that I have found. A couple that, SenseTime actually is a professor from Hong Kong, started this company. Now have moved offices to Hong Kong and Beijing. Face++, my friends from Sinovation, Kai Fu, have invested, have a lot of great partnership, focus more on the fintech space. But there are many others amazing companies on the AI space that I found mostly B2B, and they have done a really good job in like nailing some of these enterprise deals. Unlike, I think, a lot of the Silicon Valley deals I've seen for AI are not growing as fast compared to some of the Chinese ones that I have seen. All right, next and last but not least, this is the last trend, few slides, is education in China. By the way, like the logo I put on the right for this title page, is those are recognized in my mind the number 1 companies in terms of each of the trends. So Tao is actually Weilai is an education company in China that is publicly listed in the US. And they've been very active in terms of looking at US companies for investment too. But why I actually leave this as the last trend, education it's not new, right? It's been an existing industry, and in terms of offline, been doing amazingly well in China. It's the Chinese habit, like Chinese parents would rather not eat, but at least spend 40 to 50% of their income on education for their kids. There's a lot of tiger mom in China. And if you sort of look at, in terms of online education, now reach 144 million. And, sort of compare, to the US, is a huge market. But one of the things that I want to point out, beside this whole breakdown, is China, compared to, a few years ago, surprisingly, this last few years, now the Chinese learners are now willing to pay, because time is valuable. They just overloaded with all kind of information. So there are more and more content-driven learning platform in China that is making a lot of great revenue, because surprisingly, they no longer just want free content. They want quality content, and and the learner are willing to pay. So, and on top of that, because they're all only child, right? So they want the best. And a lot of university students, and there are more university students than US and Europe combined. So the demand is definitely there. And some of these Chinese students also want to go overseas, which sort of create another revenue opportunity, business opportunity for us. And last but not least, there is the online learning, particularly with English learning. There's more people that learn English in China than the entire US population. And VIP Kid is already a unicorn. There are many, many of these sort of video conferencing platforms for kids to actually learn directly from teachers in Europe, sort of off hours. As you know, like US teachers don't get paid enough. And so this created really good part-time opportunities for them to monetize even more for their teaching skills, but for a completely different geography. In this case, is China, for teaching them English. So with that, this is the last trends. I think China internet future is really, really bright. By the way, this is a really famous Chinese actor, Zhou Yunfa, from many years ago. He's earning US dollar. And this is my contact. You can email me. And by the way, this particular QR code, if you scan it with your phone right now, you'll be able to add me on WeChat. This is how all Chinese people communicate. So if you're in China, you can't add me on Twitter anyway. And then last but not least, I do have a weekly newsletter that particularly focus on Silicon Valley funding and M&A activities. So that's a newsletter and the way to sign up. So that is it. That ends my latest China Internet report. I do hope to create this report every year. I think next year, I'd love any suggestion, any new trends, and definitely love to learn from all of you. Thank you.